Hey, it's Tandy with Common Ground Alaska, and I wanted to welcome you to today's podcast. And I wanted to give a quick introduction about it. I'm really excited about this one. Today, I got to speak with David Stelzer from Azure Standard, and what a wonderful conversation it was. Just hearing the vision of a company that has managed to keep their ethics from the time they started until now. He shares some pretty fun stories about how he's gotten some products and things. He also just talks about the products that he sells. He talks about behind the scenes things that happen at Azure Standard. We talked about interesting things that I think that you will enjoy, like um, how they came about making mason canning jars, where they're made, how they're made, and all of that. We talked a lot about the agriculture industry, which obviously always interests me. His dad had a cool quote that I just have to share. His dad says, always believed, and he said he used this phrase multiple times. He said, the farmer is the guardian of the nation's health. And boy, if that's not more true now, even maybe than it was when his dad was saying it. And so I think just with that kind of being the cornerstone of our conversation, it was good, it was informative. And I just also want to say that no matter where you live, I do have a link for Azure Standard that you can follow if you're interested in creating an account. I would just recommend, if you've never bought from Azure Standard before, first just use the link and create an account. Nobody's going to start hassling you. You're not going to start getting, phone calls and emails and all that. But just look around and check out their prices, but also look at the ingredients lists of all of the things that you're looking for. I would challenge you to, maybe you're wanting to get some spaghetti, like some spaghetti sauce. This is just an random off the top of my head example. Look at your spaghetti sauce that you already buy in the grocery store. Look at the size, look what it's made out of, look at the ingredients, compare it to what Azure Standard has, and do that with multiple products. And I think that you're going to find that that they do have a standard that's above what most of us are able to get. So I highly recommend them as a company. They are definitely my favorite grocer. We buy the majority of our groceries from Azure Standard now, and anything that we can't get right here local, I do try to source through Azure Standard, because I know I'm still buying from, for the most part, I'm buying from another small local company in the United States. So, all right, enjoy the show. And if you have any questions, as always, you can reach out and ask. Please follow us however you're watching this. If you're watching on Apple Podcasts, please do follow us there. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a follow. We've got some really cool things coming up that we think you're going to enjoy. So sit back and enjoy the show. Thank you. Hey, it's Tandy with the Common Ground Alaska podcast, and I am so honored and excited to introduce you all to David Stelzer. He is the owner and founder, right, of Azure Standard, and I'm just really excited about this conversation. David, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, David, I worked for Azure Standard, or with Azure Standard, I guess, years ago with a private contractor in the logistics department. This has been years and years ago. And I got to kind of get a little bit of a look behind the scenes of what Azure Standard is all about. And, as always, that can make you go one of two ways. You either say, I'm never shopping with them again, or I am a loyal shopper forever. And I definitely went to the loyal shopper forever side, watching just the integrity behind the entire company. And so I'm really excited to have David on here. We're going to talk a little bit about Azure Standard as a company, but then I really kind of want to dig into how Azure can be a benefit to Alaskans too. So, without any further ado, David, I'm so glad to have you. And we'll just jump in with the question of, how did Azure get started?
Well, a couple things. Way back, when I was a child, I was born with a bunch of problems, super sickly. Well, I wasn't really born with it. It's really kicked in when I was just a baby. Um, the doctors didn't think I would survive. My parents went after, they didn't want to accept that as gospel, and they kept looking for other answers. They finally were able to find a naturopath that helped through my issues. Um, but a big part of that was diet change. So we changed our diet very radically. Um, and so I kind of got raised after I was about 4 or 5 years old on a cleaner and cleaner diet. And as moving forward from that diet, one of the things that happened relatively soon in 73, my dad was he was up to his armpits in um, seed wheat. You know, the most of the time seed is all dyed red because it's so poison that, and he was up to his armpits in that. He was farming, and the question came up, well, what's in this stuff? So he looked it up. He went and found out what was in it, and it was very high amounts of mercury. And he realized that he was basically breathing, inhaling, and touching mercury, and as a part of his conventional farming program. Then he looked up to see why do we treat this seed wheat like this? Why do we even put this on? It was because the chemical company said you need to, um, and they use it for it's to prevent smut. We've never had smut here, and we've never had it since, before or since, or ever seen smut. That's a more of a wet weather thing. So it's like this chemical, dangerous chemical, with a high mercury content was being used to treat a disease that's not even doesn't even exist in our area. And so he said, well, maybe the whole thing is there's something wrong with this picture. So he started studying organic and switched to organic farming in 73, a long time before it was cool.
He had
Um,
so much foresight, didn't he? And none of us even knew.
well, I don't know. I mean, most of our listeners probably weren't even around in 73, that's um, the thing. It was a little bit before, before it was cool, before it was even recognized as such a problem as it is now. That was when, the autism rate was still 1 in 500 in 73. We were not talking about the one in, 34 that it is now. And you talk about something that, is multi-generational, um, completely food chemical related. Um, and then, so for the first few years, he made a deal with Bob Moore, who was the founder of Bob's Red Mill, and we sold our grain he raised organic grain, sold it to Bob. And that went on for, I don't know, 15 years or so. And we were just, another organic commodity grain farmer, so to speak. And then um, after the grain was already planted, Bob lost his contract with Fred Meyer's, which out here on the West Coast is a kind of a big chain um, of retail stores. So he calls us up and says, I can't take your organic grain anymore because Fred Meyer's doesn't want it. And so we were left with a bunch of grain to market and a farm to support and no market. And so that's kind of when I went out trying to find a market for the grain. So I went to small, health food stores, co-ops, small grocery. Hey, can you buy some grain, some flour? And instead of being told completely no, the answer was, oh, I'll take like 5 bags a week. So that was when I set up my very first delivery routes. And so I would deliver, one week, down up to, Tri-Cities, Yakima, Seattle, and back. And the next week, Bend, Eugene, Portland, and back. And
And what
anyway,
year was this? Or roughly
this
when was
this
this?
was in the late 80s,
Okay.
so probably 85, 86, 86, maybe 86, 87 really heavily. And then late in 87, um, there was, in the meantime, there was some people, especially in Eastern Washington, that kept saying, "Hey, can you bring me this or that from Portland? Stop and pick that up while you're there." And so I'd do that. And I got this crazy idea that, hey, it seems like there's a demand for other things besides just the grain and flour that I do. At least that's what I did back then. We do a lot more than that now. Uh, so I put this little catalog together. My wife and I was newly married at the time, and so we typed in this old word processor. We made our first catalog. It was like, one piece of paper folded over, I think, kind of a thing, and the things that people would commonly ask for. And that's how Azure was born. One, because it kind of became a little hit. It started growing pretty quickly in those early years just from word of mouth. Hey, one person would tell the other and so on. And so that's kind of how it got going. And we've just continued to grow the company from then to now.
That's really
Um,
fun. So you started it was just you with the delivery truck, and then
well, it was actually just the farm pickup. I
okay.
didn't have a truck.
Okay. And do you happen to know offhand how many trucks go out per week now?
Yes, I have that right in front of me here. I could tell you how many went out last week. Let's see. 36, 35, 40, 55 last week.
So
Not counting some little trucks, but
that's amazing. And these are going all across the United States.
they are. We're delivered to all 50 states. Technically, we don't deliver to Alaska and Hawaii. We deliver to the appropriate barge lines,
Yes, of course.
and Guam and Puerto Rico, and some of those we don't. We have to deliver to barge lines, U.S. Virgin Islands. Um, but um, but we do have drops in all 50 states and a couple of territories.
That's tremendous. So when I was working with you, we were just expanding. I don't know if you remember this, but we were just expanding to the East Coast, and I got to help write the routes for the Carolinas and Georgia. We went a little bit into Florida, but not very far into Florida. And that was really fun. So now you've expanded.
So the Carolina routes that you helped to set up, that was one truck for
Yep.
all the way up until 2019. Um, this last week we sent 16 trucks to the
Oh
Carolinas.
my word. That's exciting. That's amazing. That's
I
great.
think it
Wow.
might have been slightly hurricane fueled. That was a couple more than we've ever done before, but
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
was people who must have lost their supplies.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So obviously there's a tremendous need for what it is that you're doing. So what made you decide? I mean, I understand you started with routes and you started with trucks and with just delivering to co-ops, but I'm sure that at some point you sat at a crossroads and thought, "Oh, we could do a million things. We could open stores. You could have opened stores somewhere along the way and stopped doing the route or started you could have been like the whole wholesome food of the Amazon of wholesome food, right? So you could have started just doing drop shipping to everyone and shipping. So what makes you stick with this concept of staying with co-ops and having drop managers and people meeting in their communities rather than delivering to individuals?
Well, I'm not going to say that never say never on the individual delivery. We are actually thinking about trying to set up kind of, well, a little bit like an Uber model from the drops, where people might be able to volunteer for or for a fee.
Mhm.
that the customer would pay, not to us, but we would charge the cards and all that, but that would go directly to the delivery person. So we are working through that possibility. But as far two a couple of big things. One is, yes, we've definitely looked at looking at an e-commerce model. The but what I feel like is important is to be able to feed your family healthy food. We could do an e-commerce model, but we would have to have light and expensive things. Light and expensive things are the more processed things, the things that are not as healthy for feeding, especially a family, cost effectively. Otherwise, it just gets crazy expensive, and especially if you add in temperature controlled items. Doing the packing to be able to send chill stuff to Florida in those summertime, it just gets completely ridiculous. Not to even mention frozen is almost impossible now because dry ice is considered hazmat. So, it just makes it, very difficult to be able to supply the food that I see is the foundation for health. And so that's why we have really struggled to maintain the to community delivery model. The other really cool thing about the delivery model that we do directly into the communities is that our customers get to create community around the drop, and they often make friends, um, and create a support network. So they all are somewhat of like mind. At least they have one thing in common. And it's not politics necessarily. It's that they care about the quality of the food that they're eating and that they're feeding their families. That's an important foundational um, ideology, um, because we see that those are the people that have a purpose in life. And those people meeting each other and networking has made great things happen. So that's another really important aspect of, and I know in Alaska it's even a little bit more important to do that because you have to deal with direct shipment from a barge company or a freight company, unlike the ones where we just deliver it at your local church or something,
Right.
which you was as you were talking about in the Carolinas or places
Exactly.
where we
Yeah,
direct
yeah.
deliver.
It's also interesting. I remember when we set up the drops in Detroit, it was interesting because there was a lot of crime in Detroit. So the drops had to be approved, but they're also for a little while anyway, there had to be police available to be around. Remember that? And that was I just remember like all the different things that had to happen for people to get their food. And I just remember thinking, this is determination. And like you said, specific to Alaskans, I remember we I mean, I know we have to our drop coordinator drives all the way to Anchorage just to get our order because we get it a day sooner that way. And so she drives all the way to Anchorage to get it, brings it back to the valley. Doesn't matter what the weather's doing. There's one road in and out. So if the weather's really cruddy, it might take her a while to get there. And
Mm.
so I mean a big hats off to drop coordinators who are putting all of this together. But you're so right. The community is probably my favorite part of this. And something that happens, I'm sure you're aware of this, but something that happens at a drop is someone might be like, "Oh, what is that? What is that you ordered?" And so then we're all kind of thinking about, "Oh, what are we going to get next time?" And because it's you have so many products. Um, it could be overwhelming for someone who's brand new, if they just didn't know kind of where to start. So I love that you have drop coordinators that can kind of walk people through how to place their first order and what to look for in your sales catalog. I love going through the sales catalog. It's always fun seeing what's new and stuff. So I just you guys have done a really great job. Um, I want to switch gears for just a second and talk about two things. I'm going to ask both questions because I'm not sure which is easier for you to talk about. I mean, they kind of go together. So my first question is, where do you see the food industry headed? And the second question is, what organic is to talk about organic labels? What do those really mean?
Okay. Well, the food industry, has been headed in a very, in many ways in a shipwreck direction, as far as I'm concerned, because we're getting more and more processed foods. The f- the big food companies are mostly owned by big pharma companies, and the tobacco industry is pretty heavily invested um, in the food space. So their concept from both of those perspectives is to basically try to addict people. Now, everyone has to have food, but you don't have to be addicted to high sugar, high salt, various kinds of artificial ingredients and colors and flavors and MSG derivatives, etc. That's the direction that the big food industry has taken probably for the last 30 years. It's been very dominant. Hey, ever since, smoking became a little bit less of a thing, they didn't make as much money on cigarettes, they invested heavily into the junk food industry. And in the same concept, they were trying to make something that was addictive. So you have to keep coming back for their product. Oh, you got to have, these bright colored Fruit Loops for breakfast every morning for your kids. I mean, that's the only, they won't even have breakfast unless it's brightly colored Fruit Loops that has, at least a half a dozen dangerous food chemicals in it to create that addiction and the bright color and all this different things that goes along with it. And that's the direction that's been going. Now, I think that that probably is getting close to being maxed out. And and if it's not getting close to being maxed out, we have a problem because it's already damaged the health of the nation enough that we're seeing fallout from it. We're even seeing fallout in the political at the political level at this point. Um, and um, but the good news is we don't have, as consumers, we don't have to buy into that. We don't have to eat those products. We don't have to buy those products. There are alternatives. Obviously, Azure wants to be an important part of that. We have been very careful to vet only items. But heck, I'm not going to compete with your garden. That's the best place you could possibly get your food from. You got, if I remember right, you used to grow strawberries. You still grow strawberries?
We do.
That a
Yep, we
thing?
do. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, the strawberries that grow in, there's probably if you're growing them in your local environment organically in your soil at your location, there's nothing better. That's the way everyone should eat their food as much as possible. Next best is getting it from somebody else who grew excess. And whether that's, if you can, local community is great, but Azure wants to be that extended community of those that grow extra the way that nature meant it to be. And that's the core. So if you can buy, and Azure does a lot of other things as well. We do some, you know, ready-made products. However, core cooking, that's where we want to really do our very best work is the ingredients that you use to cook your everyday meals because they're the healthiest meals available are those that are cooked at home with healthy organic ingredients. And so if we can be of assistance and service in getting you the very best ingredients for your, you know, for your kitchen, we think we're doing, in my mind, we're doing a service to the health of the nation.
Well, I agree. I agree. And it does extend beyond just your kitchen. I am fed up with buying chicken feed. So so I finally figured out for we buy eggs from other local farmers. I don't want to deal with egg chickens, but we do grow our own meat chickens. And we've just had, we'll have a couple good years and then something will happen. Um, I'm tired of there being variables in the feed. And, a lot of the commercial feeds I don't buy. I want ingredient food, just like I want ingredients out of I want to make dinner out of ingredients. I want my chickens that I'm going to be eating for dinner to be eating actual seeds and things. I just don't want them to have a pellet that has who knows what in it and a long laundry list of ingredients. So, on that end, I'm very grateful that you are willing to ship bulk stuff because the majority of our chicken food ingredients for our meat broilers will come from you and we'll just mix it ourselves. But that's just another tremendous resource that Azure Standard is. It isn't just Brussels sprouts and some ground beef. It's so much, it's way beyond that. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And I feel like so it's really easy to go into the grocery store and look for something that's organic. But that doesn't always mean that it's been grown in the way that I would anticipate organic might mean. And so I guess I would borrow from you and say I have a little higher standard, and so I have an Azure standard. So what is your organic vetting process? Do you
Well,
just
there's several things. So organic in and of itself. So as number one, the word organic only designates what's not in the product. It doesn't have anything to do with what is in the product. And it only designates what's not in the product in the sense of farm chemicals. So if a farmer is using glyphosate, um, Agent Orange derivative, whatever, those kinds of things, it's not allowed under organic standards. You're not going to get glyphosate soaked grain. They didn't use glyphosate as a desiccant and call it organic. They're not going to be able to use genetically modified seed. Those are very important aspects of organic, just the label itself, um, because it does guarantee certain things are not in the food that we don't want. Now, where I see it so much better is knowing that you're getting it from a grower who is not just deleting things, but they're actually creating a healthy soil to grow the food in. And I could talk about this for a long period of time, but to put this in a nutshell, what we're healthy soil has lots of bacteria in the soil. There are microbial organisms, bacteria, protozoa, various kinds of nematodes, and so on that live in the soil. They create one of the jobs of that soil bacteria is to break down the the things that are in the soil, whether that's the minerals that came in from a volcanic eruption thousands of years ago, or from the residue of the crop previous that's going back into the soil. Either one, in order to be utilizable for the plant, needs to be broken down by soil bacteria. The plants themselves can't do that. The plants, when they're healthy, they actually give the soil bacteria sugar into the soil to give the bacteria energy to be able to break that down. And that becomes a symbiotic relationship between soil bacteria and healthy living plants. The plant gives sugars to the soil bacteria. And I'm using that sugar as a loose term. It's not high fructose corn syrup. This is the naturally occurring sugars that come through photosynthesis. And the bacteria then utilizes that sugar for energy, breaks down the items that are in the soil, and even nitrogen. So nitrogen is actually extremely readily available in the air. The air we breathe is a huge percentage nitrogen, but it's not very utilizable by plants. It has to be broken down by soil bacteria. The cool part about that is in a natural system, nitrogen is probably the most difficult of the minerals to be broken down by soil bacteria. And nitrogen is the growth regulator of a plant. It it determines how big the plant can grow. Um, so in an ideal world where everything is, or out in the middle of a virgin forest, the nitrogen is being produced by the soil bacteria that regulates the growth. Because that regulates the growth and it's the hardest one to break down, you can be pretty assured that the rest of the minerals in that plant are in balance, that it's broken down, everything else is broken down. Conventional agriculture comes in, they add artificial synthetic nitrogen. It makes the plant grow way bigger, and there's not enough of the other nutrients around. So we have deficiencies. So that's deficiencies um, in the food that we eat. It's not balanced. It doesn't have all the minerals. You know, conventional agriculture only looks at three minerals, NPK. That's typically all they look at. On a fertilizer bag, those are the only numbers that are on there. For health, we need a roughly 72 nutrients that is known currently. There are 72 different minerals. And I'm not talking all the vitamins and stuff as well, but just on the mineral side, we need a minimum of 72 for optimum health as a human. And agriculture only looks at three, and one of them is the growth regulator. So we're seeing deficiencies. So we want to be able to produce food that the nutrients are primarily coming from the bacterial activity in the soil, so that the minerals that you get in your food are balanced. And it's not just minerals, it's also the sugars, the amino acids, um, the fats, and the essential oils as well, in addition to the minerals.
That's really cool. That was an awesome answer. Thank you. So you're actually getting and I've just been listening to a couple podcasts that talk about this, the correlation between, as we're learning more about soil health and bacteria and our very own gut health and that bacteria. It's amazing how it's exactly the same. It's different because it's our body instead of the soil, but we can't ignore either one of them. So,
Absolutely, it is. I mean, organic farmers call it the microbiome of the soil. It's the same as what, an alternative doctor might call our gut bacteria, the microbiome of the human body. And
yep.
it's, there are the similarities are striking between the bacteria that live in our bodies, in our digestive systems, and really throughout our whole bodies. It also is the digestive system of the soil, um,
Yeah.
just as it is for us.
I think that there's just something about that correlation that kind of takes us even closer to the earth a little bit, that I just think it's really fun. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So, um okay. So, how are Azure's standards better than what we see in the marketplace? I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm also going to answer it before you do. Because as an example, my question is, have you ever had to stop selling a product because something in it changed and it failed to meet your standards? And I'm going to say, I've seen this happen, but I just placed my order. Our order was just due yesterday, and I'm almost out of my chicken stock powder that I use. And of course, I have all kinds of bone broth made all the time, but sometimes you just want to add that little bit of flavor to it. And I saw you were discontinuing the chicken stock powder, and I was so disappointed, and I should have stockpiled it. I should have gotten more before. But it's because of an ingredient. So do you care to talk about that just a little bit?
No, I'm happy to talk about that. Um, the reason that the the chicken broth, and we are desperately trying to, and we do actually have one from Frontier that's not too bad. It's called unchicken or something like that.
Yeah, it's vegan. It doesn't have chicken in it.
Um, but the current supply of chicken broth, um, chicken has a non-organic conventional dextrose that they put in there. And our standards for sugar is that they are minimally organic or unrefined. So we actually prohibit unrefined or refined sugars. So when the dextrose got in there and or maltodextrin is basically the same thing. Um, it's basically another version of high fructose corn syrup. And that's just a very recently that was just truthfully brought to my attention that our mixer had changed the ingredients up, and our team had actually faithfully changed them on the website, so we weren't lying about it, but it didn't meet our standards any longer. And so we are, in fact, I have a phone call tomorrow to try it with another with a processor to try to get a better version of chicken broth that doesn't have that in it, or at least we can get some kind of an organic type sugar source. Um,
Right.
but I don't, hey, if we're going to be consistent, and that is a good seller, don't get me wrong, we sell a lot of chicken broth. So that was a little bit of a hit. It was chicken broth, beef broth, onion soup mix, all best sellers that we found out had that product in it. And we will come up with a new version. I promise. I know it's possible, but I'm not going to continue to sell it and pretend like it doesn't happen while we're making the formulation. Couple examples of that, the carob product that we sold, um, they changed the ingredients on it to be a genetically modified in, oils. This has been some years ago now. We quit selling carob completely. We didn't have a carob in the house. But
Wow.
carob is, it's a really healthy product. And we wanted to have that. We went to all the trouble. We actually built a carob factory and we make our own carob completely from scratch. It's the only certified organic carob on the market. Now there's other labels, but we made all of them because we actually built a plant to make carob. So we actually go to extreme lengths to be able, if it doesn't exist, sometimes we actually create it. Um,
I love that. And you know what? There's something about living this lifestyle that's just a little bit different. I think it's okay once in a while to there's like the whole um I don't remember the first part of it, but make do or do without. So the chicken stock powder is not something that, my family's not probably even going to miss it. It's more me because it's such a convenience item.
Mhm.
But I appreciate knowing that it was an issue, that you found an issue. And how cool is it that you have a team that's watching for these things? Because I know you vetted it to begin with, and then somehow it changed, and so you sell a lot of products to be looking at those ingredients in every products consistently to be seeing when there's an issue is a big deal, but also it's okay for us to do without these things for a minute until we can find something that's good, and I think that's something that maybe I as a housewife and the one cooking, I need to learn to do better. I'm used to the convenience of, "Oh, I'm out of such and such. I'll just run to the grocery store and get it," but maybe it's not the best
well,
product.
and I do want to have healthy versions of as many things as we possibly can,
Right.
including the chicken broth. I think we totally need to have that. I just want a clean and a healthy one, and maybe we can go all the way to an organic one. That's my goal as we reformulate this thing. Um, we just did that. In fact, it should be here. It's on the water right now. But I don't know if you ever tried the sun drops, like the kind of like M&M candies that we had for years and years,
Those are gone, yes.
they're gone. The new ones are on the water. So I actually worked with a company actually in Peru to make us a certified organic. Now the colors won't be quite as bright, but they will be basically a new colored chocolate drop. They taste way better, and they will be 100% fully certified organic. And but they were gone. I mean, we were out for almost a year before we were able to get these formulated, all the back and forth testing. It's a little harder to test back and forth from, when you're working with a company in Peru. But hey, we don't grow chocolate here or cacao. They grow it in Peru. So we're having it made at the Peruvian factory that we work with anyway on other chocolate products. But they specially formulated that. We developed it, formulated it, and they're making it just for us. So we will have a certified organic um, little chocolate colored candy in stock
I
again here, probably in about a month.
That is super exciting. You heard it here first, right? No, we have, I wish I would have grabbed it. I have a quart jar left of those, that I'm hoarding, and I actually caught my husband. It's behind, like, I have, all my stock, and he was digging around looking for those because he just wanted, like, something quick. We're an ingredients house, so there aren't a lot of, like, snacky things around, and I said, "Don't you dare, mister. Those are for my monster cookies at Christmas. Don't you dare." So so now bless his heart.
Well, I'm not totally sure we'll have them, with the extra time getting to Alaska for Christmas, but it should be really close.
That's okay. We have Christmas stock now and but he'll know it's coming. So no, that's really fun. Those are really good. So but again, it's just it's got to be a lot of work to keep track of that stuff. And so I appreciate that you even bother. It's not just like you vet a company once and then assume they're good for life. It's a constant vetting and
It
that's
is a lot harder when that happens. It's training our staff as we get notifications, and sometimes we even hear it from customers, which is what actually was the case in the situation with the chicken broth. The company
yeah.
that, they did change it on our label, but we don't have to do all the vetting for the label when it's not organic. The organic stuff, it's a pretty strong process. We know when something changes there, but on the conventional, it's not much of a process. And we didn't catch it. The customer
Yeah.
caught it. I'm embarrassed about that, but hey, as soon as that did happen, we're going to make the change like
Well,
now.
that's pretty cool. And I personally don't think it's something to be embarrassed about, something to be proud of because you could have just said, "Well, this is the only one we can find. Take it or leave it." But I appreciate that the standard is higher. So on that note, is it tricky to find products that meet the standards? Like, do you find that I guess I'm kind of envisioning one of two things. Someone's so excited that because their products are a higher standard and they're so excited to have someone to sell it to that gets it, or is it just trickier because you're up here and a lot of people just aren't quite there?
I think it's beautiful. It's both.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Originally when Azure Standard, one of the things is, as a farmer, because we are still farmers, and I identify as a farmer, in many ways, still with a lot of our growers. And in the conventional world, or even in the organic commodities world, you hold out both hands and you say, "How much? How much do I have to pay for tractors and fuel and inputs and land and everything that goes along with that?" Then you hold out your other hand and you say, "Well, how much will you give me for my grain or vegetables or meat or whatever it is?" And that's set by some Chicago Board of Trade or something that has no clue. And so you have no there's no way you can impact your bottom line except through volume. So
Mhm.
when you're just dealing with volume as a farmer, as your only incentive, it becomes quality goes by the wayside. So my dad used to always say, the farmer is the guardian of the nation's health. Well, if you get right down to it, that's actually absolutely true. but they're incentivized exactly opposite of being their only incentive is to be the guardian of the nation's volume of second rate food, which often gets second rate. So one of Azure's missions from the very beginning was to be able to connect the farmer who really cares about what he's growing and really cares about his land and his soil with um, a family that really cares about what they're eating.
Mhm.
That is very, very important. And typically, a lot of, when we're talking about agricultural commodities and that it's usually not that hard to find. There's a lot of farmers just looking for somebody that can use their higher quality products. And, it's just a matter of some connections.
Yeah.
Now, when we get into other things, that can be a little bit more difficult. When we're into, for instance, it's not just ingredients, say it's crackers, or in the case of the carob, we found that it was impossible and we had to do it ourselves. Um, but if I'm wanting to get some healthy crackers made or something like that, then then that becomes a lot more difficult than just the connection, because then you have multiple ingredients. You have the connection of the baker or whatever, if it's a cracker, or, the melanger in the case of the carob or the chocolates, that we can actually work with and trust and vet all the way through the process. So yeah, for the basic ingredients, it's usually fairly easy. When we get into the more complicated things, it becomes increasingly difficult.
Yes, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. And even you also have to, especially with the produce, you have to consider shipping because it used to be when, if you were taking even produce when you first started, you were just taking it to Seattle. That's, half a day's drive. Now it's got to be our turnaround is it leaves on Monday and we pick up our stuff on Tuesday, on the fall, a week later, Tuesday. So we've got
Mhm.
8 days in transit that and I know that, you're doing the same thing when you're moving across the United States. There's some transit time and figuring out how to move that. There's a
Yeah, I
lot to
mean,
that
you
too.
guys are probably the longest transit time going to Alaska, or well, Hawaii is usually longer. Um, but hey, every once in a while it happens. We had a truck that couldn't deliver because of the hurricane back
Mhm.
there just 2 weeks ago, I guess, in Florida, Tampa Bay, and we just got it in last week, a whole week late compared with when they, were supposed to have gotten it. So that was almost 14 days in transit because we couldn't get in there.
Sure,
And
sure. And that's just life. It's this there's gonna be anomalies for sure. So, I just wanna ask you, so I wanna kinda dig into Alaska for a minute. Um, I know why I order from Azure Standard, and it's multifaceted. I order because I believe in the company, because I got to see kind of behind the scenes how things work. Um, I order because the majority of the things that I get come in good shape. And we do, we order from other places too, but not as often because the consistency just isn't there. We start local and kind of work our way out. That's just how we do things. Um, but what would be, if you had to say, why did you start coming to Alaska to begin with? Like why is Alaska a place that you enjoy sending stuff to?
um, well, the very first customer I ever had in Alaska, um, um, he was from Skagway. My very first customer was in Skagway, and his name was Hoffmeister. He very great guy, and he educated me on the way Alaska buys its groceries. He said, "Well, here in Skagway," he says, "we have two choices. Either we order the product on the barge through Alaska Marine Line up from Seattle, or we have to take a ferry and go to one of the big grocery store chains in either Juneau or Anchorage to get our groceries. So there's only big grocery store chains in Juneau and Anchorage, which, I mean, this has been a few years ago, so that may have changed a little bit, but and then we have to take the ferry back home, and and it's kind of an expensive process to take the ferry from Juneau to Skagway and back, and I either have to hire a car or have to take my whole car on the ferry, and it's just one of those. So he said, we like to be able to order our product directly from on the barge lines directly from Seattle. We're used to doing that. And that's a normal thing here in Alaska. So I said, well, let's give it a try. So we shipped him the very first shipment and everything went great. Oh, yeah, that's all great. We got it 5 days later. I think Skagway's maybe a little closer than you are.
A lot
There's
closer.
southeast, right? I think southeast
Yeah.
Alaska.
Yeah.
Um, but it went great. And so then we started, then the word began to spread a little bit about Alaska. And Dave Hoffmeister, he knew several other people, so we got drops. They were originally mostly in Southeast Alaska initially, because it was, Alaska Marine Line. I think they were the main ones. And then when we began to branch out into the rest of the carriers, then then we got somebody over in, I think it was Kingfisher, if I'm not mistaken, way over by the Aleutian Islands there somewhere, and they only got delivery twice a year
Oh, wow.
because they apparently it's froze up all winter long, so they'd get one in the spring and one in the fall, and that was kind of the way that went. Well, this is, but they bought huge, like pallets and pallets of stuff, and twice a year. So, well, they're, if the people are already somewhat used to buying their food and ordering their food in and not browsing a supermarket shelf, this is a great place to pitch the Azure concept. And I guess that's kind of how it started. It
I
was
think
actually
that's
introduced to me by a customer. I didn't think of it myself.
right? Well, you don't know what you don't know. That's just how that works. So, and we do have, we have grocery stores here. I could drive an hour and a half and go to Costco if I wanted to, and I do occasionally for things. But I think a major there, you offer a lot of things that are harder to get up here. Um, and I kind of have a motto. Um I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but my motto is choose anything over Amazon. So I look around and I'm like, where else can I get this from before I hit buy now on Amazon? And so that's Azure Standard has been really key to that because and I have found that most things I'm looking for you have or you have a version of it that maybe is different than I'm used to, but that that I'm willing to try and see if it would be a good replacement. Um, so I think that's a big reason for Azure Standard in Alaska is that the just the variety is so huge from cleaning products to food to our grains and we do have Margaret Lowe who runs Holy Living. I know she buys pallets from you a couple times a year and does she kind of has her own store up here, her own little Azure Standard store, along with other stuff. She does, wheat Montana grains and stuff too. But we have her as, if I wanted to find some Azure Standard stuff quick, I can go to her and drive an hour, or I can just order it for the drop. But you just offer so many things that we can't get up here without going through Amazon. So, or another big, I shouldn't pick on them. Amazon's great for some things, but I prefer to go elsewhere first. So, so I just think that it's, even like I said, we can even order our chicken food, our ingredients for our chicken food for, to raise out 100 or probably 150 this year broiler chickens. We can order all the ingredients from you and, it's on a pallet. I got to mix it up, it's great. It's a fabulous resource. So I would I would say thank you for going through the work it takes to get the stuff up here because I know it's not easy. So, what's the future of Azure Standard? What's next? What's kind of fun that you're working on?
Well, I think I already did a spoiler on that when you talked up front. That is one of the things we actually are working on is the Uber model home delivery piece. Probably one of the bigger um, public facing, I should say. We're dealing with several things in the background that we're having to, you know, work our way through. But that is something that will be a major change. Um, well, it won't be a change because we're not going to discontinue anything. We'll still be doing the drops just the way we are, but it will be an addition. I've been going to like conferences, homesteader conferences, and some naturopathic uh, um, I've been conferences. I've been asked to speak at quite a few of those recently. And so as I listen to customers that come in, I go to, these homesteader conferences or naturopathic, and it tends to be, maybe 30% of the people are Azure customers already that come through, and about 30% have heard of Azure but have never bought. Um, and about 30 we get to introduce it brand new. Um, but the 30% that have heard of Azure and never bought, it tends to always be that one thing. Hey, I can't get to the drop at the right time. I work during the day. I can't take a day off um, every month to be able to deal with it. I don't have a good friend that, is able to pick up all my stuff. And so overcoming that barrier is definitely um, one of the next steps that we want to be able to do. And the other step is, and this is something that we have been doing already on a smaller scale, but I really want to increase that. And that's to be able to vet the products one step deeper in the sense of instead of selling other people's brands, to be able to have our own recipe that I can be proud of, um, and create more and more products with our label on it. That does two things for us. Number one is it puts us in much better control of the ingredients in the process. And number two, it cuts out the whole layer of marketing expense. So for some other brand, so even if we're not actually making it ourselves, if we like the sun drops that I was mentioning earlier, I'm working with a company in Peru to make that for us. But if it was somebody else's brand, then they would have to bring it over here. There's a 5% broker fee that's going to definitely be added. They're going to want some kind of money added to the cost of it for their branding and marketing of that brand, which doesn't do our Azure customers any good at all. That's money set aside for the free fills in the stores and all that kind of stuff that doesn't even happen and with Azure. And so we're able to create a higher value product for the same price, or able to reduce the price a little bit in many cases.
Wow.
Good case in point. I mean, if you look at one of the ones we did this last summer was coconut milk. So I contracted with our quality, two different companies actually, to make coconut milk for us in Indonesia. And so the coconut milk, if you look at the other brands, and nothing against the other brands, they're ones we've had for years, and I haven't even discontinued all of them. We still have, Natural Value coconut milk, Edward and Sons coconut milk, etc. Um, or I can't think that's Simply Organic is what they call their brand now. But the coconut milk that we carry, if you were to compare the two side by side on the on the website, you're going to be looking at, a 10 to 20% cheaper to get the Azure branded product. And, if you want to know the truth, it comes from the same factory.
Mm,
And it has a little higher standards for us because we actually hold them to a little higher standards than the other. Um, it's to our specifications, I guess I should say.
isn't that
And
interesting?
and yet at the same time, we're able to, to save, somewhere between 10 and 20% to our customers.
Wow.
So I think, you know, and sometimes it comes in roughly the same price because we do push the quality up a little bit. We don't,
Okay.
we don't, these sun drops won't come in any cheaper, but they are certified organic where the others were not. And so those will be and technically I can't use the term sun drops because that's branded. The new ones won't be sun drops, the old ones are.
Oh, okay. Okay. Noted. I'll put that
That's
in the
their
show notes.
that's their brand. Um, um, but so that's another big thing that we're doing here at Azure. Um, and then otherwise, most of it's on the back end. We're trying to figure out ways to be able to stay ahead of the expansion and the growth and be able to deliver the same great quality even as we grow. I mean, I tell my team every week that, hey, we can grow as much as we want to grow, or as much as our customers want us to grow, really. But we are not going to sacrifice our soul for growth.
Hmm.
We have to maybe be true to our soul, true to the roots. And as long as we can do that, we will sell to as many customers as want to buy because I think, we do know how to scale.
Yeah, I think you do too, and that's obviously clear because it was one truck going into the Carolinas, and now there's 16. That's incredible. That's fun to hear. That makes me proud.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the other things that I actually want to ask, what is up with the price of chocolate? What has happened?
um, so about 80% of the world's chocolate comes from Africa. And in Africa, there was it's a disease that is taking that is damaging the chocolate production at a very substantial amount. Um, I don't know how to describe it. I guess you do strawberries. If you ever done blueberries, you ever heard of like a fungus that get on it and create a mummy berry, a little berry that never completely finishes?
No, but
It's
that sounds terrible. It sounds like it would really kill production.
and so they're experiencing that in Africa. At this point, that has not moved into South America yet at any major degree. Although to make it worse, South America, who they produce about 17% of the world's chocolate, um, they had a poor crop this year to top that off. And Africa had a near disaster of a crop.
Mm.
Um, and there is some chocolate being grown in a few other parts of the world, Indonesia, Australia, a few places, but there's really pretty small band along the equator where chocolate can be grown and the cacao can be grown. So I am hopeful that there will be a remedy for the disease that's in chocolate, and it doesn't seem to be affecting the wild. There's two different ways chocolate is grown. One is it's another tree in the jungle, and they kind of create paths through the jungle and harvest the chocolate. And then there's also huge chocolate plantations where it's monocropped. It does not seem to be destroying the ones in the jungle nearly so much. So I guess we'll see if
Okay. Well,
basically if a cure can be come up with. But hey, it's not just organic chocolate. Conventional chocolate is being hit at the same rate.
Yeah, it
It's
sounds
being
that's what I was
hit just as
understanding.
hard. The only
Yeah,
difference is that, in our organic, like 80% chocolate, or, compared with Hershey's, they only use about 10 or 20% chocolate. The rest is sugar and other artificial ingredients. Whereas real chocolate, that's, 80% chocolate, and the other oils and sugars are maybe only 20%. They're being affected at a higher margin just because there's a lot more actual chocolate in it
sure.
than
That makes
just
sense.
just sugar and stuff. So,
So it's going to look more expensive on the organic market because or on the higher tiered chocolate market because there's more chocolate. They can't it's not watered down for lack of a better
well, it's not
description.
sugared down. Sugar
Sugared
and
down. There
oil.
you go.
Yes, it's sugar and oil that they put in there to dilute it.
Yeah, that's sad. Okay, my last question, and I definitely want to be cognizant of your time is, I just want to talk about your jars really quick. I'll give a quick personal testimony. I have a lot of jars, way too many jars. I'm sure that people that live in my house would say I'm kind of a hoarder when it comes to jars. And I am so impressed with the Azure Standard jars. I honestly didn't expect to be because I'd heard they were being made overseas and but I thought that it was fun that you put superb made in the USA superb lids on them. And then but you have the jars that are made overseas and I honestly when I heard that they it was done that way I thought, "Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why." So I did some digging and read but if you want to just kind of go into that a little bit but I just wanted to preface with I absolutely love your jars. They're better than I anticipated, which and
Well, thank you.
my standard was pretty high.
Okay. Well, back about 4 years ago now, I began to realize how crappy the major brands of canning jars were getting. They were getting worse and worse. And um, and there were some people responding in the lid space. There was Superb, there was Four Jars, there were several different ones that were creating a little bit better lid, but nobody was touching the jar. It was still basically ball and cur jars, and there are a few off brands that were even worse. And can we actually go back and make a jar that is more like Ball was 50 years ago? Can we do that? I mean, Ball, obviously, their company's been sold 3 times. They're owned by Rubbermaid now. They're so, it's just profit incentive for them. But for people who actually can, I mean, my own wife was getting frustrated. She was, every time she would uh, pressure can or water bath very heavily, it's always at least one jar was going to break. It was like, what the heck? It's like, um, so I started doing research on different kinds of jars. How can we do it? We contacted almost every jar manufacturer in the world that we could find that had the capacity to do canning jars. Um, about 30 different glass factories. And there was, in all fairness, I will say that there was one American, well, there were actually two American companies that have the capacity to do it. Um, and one of them basically said, um, this was in like 2022 or 2021, and they said, we can talk about it in 2025 or six, maybe it was. That we can't, we're not taking any new designs on. The other company said, yeah, they would do it, but we had to commit to a million units of each style per year. And I just could not, that was too high of a risk for me to do. And they said they would do it to our specs if we would commit to a million units per year. A million units meaning a million jars of each size and lid, diameter. So we ended up settling on another company. They were they're actually in Taiwan, um, but they own Taiwan is right in the ocean just out of China. And they said, "Oh yeah, we can do it to your specs. We'll do exactly what you want." And and they even let us work with it. They did samples. We broke, I can't tell you how many jars we broke, doing tests to see how. So we would put in, they would send us a group of sample jars. We would put them in hot water, take, take a boiling jar and dunk it into cold water, colder and colder water, and see how many degrees of variance we could get before the jar would break. And because I wanted to be 150-degree variance,
Hmm.
that was our
Wow.
goal. And I think we are really, really close. All the smaller jars do it very easily. Um, the half gallon is just right there. It'll do 150, but 152 about breaks it. It's
Okay.
just barely, barely will do that consistently. I
Yeah.
mean, inconsistently, I mean, some jars are a little better than others, but on a consistent basis. So we spent a whole bunch of time going through creating the specs, breaking jars, saying we need a little heavier here. And we also did the indent because one of the things that was really important to me that I want to do, and we are doing, is to put some of the liquid products that we sell at Azure and we have to buy jars in a canning jar. Why the heck do we want to buy a mayonnaise jar for roughly the same price that you can't can in, you can't use again in your kitchen or in your pantry? So if you're going to buy a jar of peanut butter from Azure, I want to be able to put it in a canning jar that you can, oh, now I have a pint jar and I can use that for canning. I can use it for anything. And I want, that's important to me. So we put the decoration moving in so you can still put a label on it. So
I
that
love
was
that.
the other criteria that it had to have, which took a little more design because nobody else is doing that. We didn't find anyone else, and we didn't want it to weaken the glass. So our glass is a little heavier. They weigh we had to go with a little bit more weight than a ball jar. They're about 10% heavier as far as amount of glass in at least from the modern ball jar, not from one from the 60s.
Right.
Um, but they will, So the Taiwanese company said, well, in order to do what you need, we're going to have to move it to our Chinese factory instead of our Taiwanese plant because we get other jars from their Taiwan plant. We need to move this particular production to, because of your specs, we're not able to do quite as heavy a jar at in our Taiwan plant, so it's going to go to our Chinese plant. So we did take a lot of heck for having jars made in China. Um, and I'm not going to lie about it and say that they're made in Taiwan, or nor am I going to say they're made in the USA like some other companies do just because they package them in the USA.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, that's just not, you know, chips fall where they may. I don't, but right now it was the best. It was the company that would give us the best jar and could do it I mean, we still have to buy a lot of jars, but would be reasonable about it and not make some kind of an annual minimum. It's only a per run minimum
Gotcha.
that we have to do. And we've gone back several times on some of these jars already. Um, but those were the two criteria, and that was what drove us so to this particular manufacturing plant. And and it really is when we're canning, we're in our homes canning. It's not about where the jar is made. It's about whether it's going to hold up and be useful long term. And so that was the bottom line. We want to be able to give the best jar that we can, irregardless, because I think that's the overarching thing. Hey, made in China, made in Taiwan, made in even in the US or Mexico. Um, where are we able to get the very best of the best?
Yeah. Well, you obviously put a lot of care and forethought into it. It wasn't just excuse me, it wasn't just made in China because that's cheap and easy and quick. It was that was the best option that you have, and you're on top of the whole
If
process. And
we're
I
gonna do cheap and easy, we could have got a cheap and easy Chinese jar
right.
or even an American jar. Um, but yeah, we wouldn't have had to do all the specking and if I wanted an 80 or a 90 degree jar, um, that would we could be making more money on them. We do have
Yeah.
to pay more for this jar, and I'm trying to price it at such a place that it's not unaffordable for the home canner. I think
I
for the most part, it's in line. Other than if there's a big sale at Walmart or something, other than that, on ball jars, which are going to break on you anyway. But otherwise, they're pretty close to par in the market, even
yeah, I
though
would
we actually pay more than I'm sure Ball does for their jars.
yeah, yeah, that's the sticker part, huh? That's a bummer. So, well, I'd say you've done a very good job of it. And I have to say for just a second, I felt like a housewife from the 40s and 50s when they used to remember when they I mean, I don't we don't remember, but they used to make the flour sacks, they started putting the decorations on them so women could use them as fabric, remember?
Oh
So I
yes,
feel
back in
like
the Depression, yes.
yes, during the depression times, and I feel like that's kind of what you've done by putting your products in canning jars as we get, we don't just get spaghetti sauce or I have no idea what, applesauce, whatever, but we also get a jar out of the deal. Like
Hmm.
this is so
Well, I mean,
so
obviously, it's not all the other brands. Although I've sold one other brand on our jars now. Oregon Brine Works is going to start using our jars. Yeah, it's a fermented sauerkrauts and pickles that they do. So
and
they're going to
salsas. Their
start
salsas are so good.
they're going to start using a couple of our jars. Maybe not for everything, but for their um, and then of course the Sweet Creek is going to be in our jars.
Very good.
And then of course all the stuff that we do ourselves.
That's really exciting. Well, I'd say you guys have done an excellent job. Thank you so much, David, for spending some time with us and for talking about Alaska. And
All right, sounds good.
all right, thank you.
All right, very nice talking with you again.
Yes, you too.